while. How do you manage to stay undistracted while writing on social media? I find that very hard, especially if I want to generate content. Is it
Yeah,
just your book, or is there a starting point?
sure. So um, the the answer to this question of how do you make sure you don't do too much of one thing or another is to understand the difference between traction and distraction, right? The traction and distraction are opposites. The opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. So what is traction? What is distraction? Both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull, and they both end in the same 6 letters, ACTION, that spells action. So traction and distraction, these are not things that happen to you, right? We like to think about distraction happening to us. Oh, social media happened to me. My phone, there was some message and that happened to me. My boss, my kids, they interrupted me. That happened to me. But that's not the right way to look at it. In fact, that distraction is an action that we ourselves take. It's right there in the word, right? So traction by definition is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do. Things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of traction. The opposite of traction, distraction, is any action that pulls you away from what you plan to do, further away from your goals, further away from your values, further away from becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this is really important. This isn't just semantics. This is incredibly important because the difference between traction and distraction is one word. That one word is intent. As Dorothy Parker said, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. So there's nothing evil about social media. Okay. I know that the traditional media, it's really interesting. All the people who tell you that social media is bad for you are on traditional legacy media, right? It's the New York Times, it's the Atlantic, it's CNN, it's BBC. It's these people whose business model is exactly the same. They turn your eyeballs into money. So we need to be cognizant that none of these things are bad. There's nothing wrong with the news unless you're a news junkie. There's nothing wrong with video games unless you're addicted to them. It's about the harm caused by these things, not the behavior itself. So if you're using them in a way that serves you rather than hurts you, there's nothing wrong with it. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that you're using it according to your values and your schedule, not someone else's?
Week 5 of
Well,
my 10 challenge with secondhand clothes, where I show you that you don't.
oops, not sure where that came from, but we'll keep going. I lost my train of thought there. What was the last thing I said?
That was a distraction.
That was a distraction. That's what's called an external trigger. Exactly. I think so. So to wrap up this point, the way you make sure you're not distracted by something that you were previously distracted by is to make time for it. So when you ask me, how do I make sure that I can use social media in a way that serves me rather than hurts me? It's because I have time in my schedule for social media, right? I don't use it whenever I feel like it. And that word feel like it is very intentional because there's two kinds of triggers. We have what we call external triggers. Those are the pings, the dings, the rings, everything in our outside environment. Those are called external triggers. But those only account for about 10% of our distractions, 10%. The other 90% of the time we get distracted. It's not because of a ping, ding, or ring. It's not because of something outside of us. It's because something inside of us. These are called internal triggers. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety. These are the cause of 90% of our distractions. So it's not the tech. It's not the tech. I promise you, if Zuckerberg says, hey, you know what? I'm done. No more Meta, no more Facebook. I'm going to retire. Do you think people are going to start reading Chaucer and Shakespeare in their spare time? No. People have always been distracted because people will always be distracted. Plato was talking about distraction 2,500 years before the internet. It's part of the human condition. We will always get distracted by something unless we understand why we're distracted. We're not distracted because of these things. We're distracted because of this thing. We're distracted because we don't know how to deal with discomfort. So when we feel bored, lonesome, stressed, anxious, we take a drink. We change the channels. We scroll. We do something to get our mind off that uncomfortable feeling. And so that's where you have to start. That's step number one. Master the internal triggers or they will become your master. So that's step number one. Understand what you will do with that discomfort to move you towards traction rather than trying to escape with distraction. The second step is to make time for traction, to plan time in your day for whatever it is you're going to do, whether that's play video games, play with your kids, go on social media, whatever it is, work, whatever it is you want to do, you've got that time on your schedule. The third step is to hack back the external triggers. So this is where we do take care of all those pings, dings, and rings. Not only the basic stuff like your phone, your computer. That's kindergarten. That's easy to do. I can show you in half an hour how to make your phone perfectly indistractable. But what about the other things that can distract us that are external triggers, like your emails that you didn't need to answer or send? What about those stupid meetings that are nothing but a waste of time? What about your kids? Your kids are wonderful. We love our kids, but they can be a huge distraction. So what do we do about all those external triggers? And then finally, the last step is to prevent distraction with pacts, which is where we decide in advance that we have some kind of firewall against distraction. Okay, the last line of defense. And so when you use these 4 strategies in concert, anyone can become indistractable. So that's the 30,000-foot view. We can dive into the details, of course. Who's next? This is gonna be a short session, guys.
Yeah.
I have a question. You started to touch on reading with Chaucer and Shakespeare, and there was an article that came out this week by an academic, Adam Kotsko, about basically noticing reading trouble, in particular this cohort that's in undergraduate years now, but also adults, also kind of across the board in terms of the amount of time that people can read one single thing, in a sitting or what have you, pointing out that a lot of things start to fall apart. Assignments, things like summarize what you read. And this complaint, as you said, is it comes up every generation for a lot of different reasons. But I'm wondering, because it does seem to me that the remedies that people use often don't seem to me deep enough in terms of the physicality and embodied quality of the reading is just thought of as too cognitive and too ethereal and intellectual, and not really paying attention to the bodily features of it. And I just wonder if there are particular things about reading that you might recommend or say to academics, you may want to change the way that you're framing things, because you may be actually exacerbating what you're seeing rather than being constructive, and compassionate and actually building skill rather than just kind of shaming.
Tell me more about the reframing. I didn't quite understand that. What would academics need to reframe?
Yeah, just the way that you just reframed social media, as because I think a lot of academics do think that the phone is what is making kids, students, into less competent readers, and themselves and faculty themselves, as being like, I can look at an article, I can look at a paper, it's right there. I do think there's a externalization, basically, and not dealing as much with the internal. So I just didn't know if there were specific things to reading that you found, along similar lines that
I am pretty media agnostic. You're absolutely right that we've heard this complaint every generation. There's always a moral panic about, oh, the kids are so stupid these days. The kids don't know what they're doing. There's the latest device is melting their brains. We heard this when I was a kid. They called us couch potatoes because we watched so much TV, because MTV was a new technology and that was supposed to be melting our brains. And before that, it was heavy metal music. And before that, it was rock and roll. And before that, it was the radio, all the way to Socrates bemoaning this awful technology of his day, Socrates' day, 2,500 years ago, of the written word. The written word was a terrible new technology. So we've kind of come full circle here, that what used to be a terrible technology that Socrates said, quote, would enfeeble men's minds. The written word was a terrible technology. We shouldn't teach people to be literate, because they would lose so much if they read things, as opposed to what people did in those days. They would memorize things. And you know what? We cannot do things that the ancient Greeks could. The ancient Greeks would memorize books and tomes of information. They would memorize them because many of them were illiterate. We can't do that today. We gave up something, right, to get something else. Now we externalize information, right? I don't memorize my book. My book is right there in print. So this is a continually evolving process whereby whatever was around before you were born seems like the way it always was, right? We've always had books because as long as I've been alive, they've been around. So we don't think of them as new technology. And so I think that's a big mistake because media continues to evolve. There's nothing that says that the book is the final word, pun intended, right? There will be something else. Who says that video is not better? Video is better. It's a much more information-rich data delivery mechanism for some types of information, right? You can per minute, you can learn a lot more from a video than reading a book because you have colors and sounds and textures that you can't describe as quickly. So it's not that, media tends not to destroy the last form. It tends to complement. It tends to find niches, just like Darwin's finches. Media tends to fit into certain places. So I think that the death of one particular source of media is always exaggerated. I'm always a little cautious about, people saying, oh, people don't read anymore. Of course they read. They just read differently, right? And in fact, we know that people spend more time reading and writing than ever before, but they're doing it in the form of text messages and WhatsApp and social media posts. It's just a different medium. So I'm not terribly concerned about that. I think in terms of, what we hear from academics, academics are amongst the most deflecting people I know. It's always somebody else doing it, right? And of course, that's how they get rewarded. The incentive model in academia is to show that there's some big societal catastrophe. So we're going to collect some anecdotal information, call it data with a small sample size, and now we get to publish our results. Nobody talks about the fact that, why students don't read as much? Because of grade inflation. Because there aren't the consequences there used to be, right? The average grade used to be, when I went to college, was a C, and people were graded on a curve. The average grade now is like an A minus. So the consequences for not doing your assignments, for not reading things, are a lot less. And so guess what? When you have lower standards, people don't perform as high. People don't perform as well. And so I think that's a big part of it, is that we need to ask ourselves, wait, are the standards still there to incentivize these types of behaviors? And I guarantee you, if more people started flunking out because they weren't doing the reading assignments, incentives work. They would start doing the reading assignments. Not that reading is necessarily the holy grail. I think that, there's a lot of information that could be better transferred in other mediums. But I think, blaming the new thing causing old problems is the hallmark of a moral panic. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think overall, I'm not as concerned as other people are. I think in short, the mediums are evolving. And if we see people aren't reading traditional works, those type of studies tend to be pretty skewed. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. Kids do read, but they read the kind of stuff that is entertaining, right? Kids don't want to read boring books, but they love Harry Potter, right? Like Harry Potter's great. So, it's about giving kids the type of content that they actually enjoy. So I think that's, when we give people boring content of any age, guess what? They don't like to spend time with it. And so, yes, there is more competition for their time. Just the fact that we can pull out our phones and we have a diversion of attention from one thing or another. But remember, one of the things that we had moral panics about were the novels. Novels were seen as something that was, the same exact things that we used to say, that we say today about social media, that it's bad for women and children. Like literally the same thing was said about novels, that novels were this terrible new technology that definitely women and children should not consume. Nothing's new under the sun.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think comic books, there's a
comic books.
Robert Warshaw in the 40s who wrote brilliant stuff about comic books, making that point, about the moral panic of them, and that, if you saw what was really going on, you would be able to appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have a question for later on after other people have asked. I'll listen to some other questions, but thank you.
Sure thing.
So Nir, I have a question. I really like the concept that you mentioned that, carve time out for the distractions in your life so that you can make time for the attractions of your life. But even if you sometimes do that during the time that you want to have that focused attention on, doing something that you honestly like doing, but still there are those distractions that come into the mind. So how do you hack those moments to kind of put you back on track is what my question.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so step number one, mastering those internal triggers. So there's over a dozen different techniques you can use in the book on how to do that. Let me give you one that I use almost every single day. So I've been a professional author now for over a decade, and every day that I write, I want to get distracted. Right? Writing is really hard work. And as I'm writing, I'm thinking, is anybody going to like this? Is this even relevant? What if it's no good? What if, there's all kinds of fear and doubt and uncertainty. And all I want to do is go check my email or go check the news or go check social media or do anything but the writing. Oh, this is my favorite. Let me just go Google something so I can do a bit of research. When really, I'm just trying to avoid the writing because writing is really hard work. So there's all kinds of techniques you can use. Again, there's over a dozen in the book. But one of the techniques that I use almost every single day is called the 10-minute rule. And the 10-minute rule acknowledges that the way we used to do things of strict abstinence, we saw this in the 80s in the United States with Nancy Reagan telling kids, just say no to drugs, just say no, just don't do it. We know that abstinence tends not to work, especially when you have the triggers readily accessible, right? So a much better, and the reason, by the way, that abstinence doesn't work, that telling yourself not to do something doesn't work, is that there's a psychological phenomenon called psychological reactance. Reactance is this phenomenon whereby when you are told what to do, your instinct is to rebel. Don't believe me? Think of the last time your boss micromanaged you. Think back to when your mother told you to put on a coat because it's cold outside. Don't tell me what to do. Right? We don't like being told what to do. That's psychological reactance. The crazy thing is, this is how weird our human brains are. We elicit psychological reactance even if it is ourselves telling us what to do. Right? Like if you're on a diet, you're saying, oh, don't eat that thing, or don't smoke that cigarette, or don't do this, don't do that. When you say to yourself, no, 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 your instinct, your gut wants to do anything but. In fact, it's fascinating. I'm going to go on a little tangent if you don't mind. Smoking. We used to think that smoking is all about nicotine. Turns out it's not just the nicotine that makes cigarettes addictive. In fact, it's probably not very much of the nicotine at all that makes smoking addictive. And I'll give you some evidence for this. If you ask a smoker, anybody here a smoker by chance? No, I didn't think so. But anyway, if you ask your neighborhood smoker, why do they smoke? Number one reason people give on surveys as to why they smoke, it's relaxing. It's relaxing. That doesn't make any sense. Nicotine is a stimulant. If any of you were to go get a pack of nicotine gum, don't smoke, but try nicotine gum sometime, you'll get wired. If you think caffeine, gives you a boost, try some nicotine gum. You're going to feel it. It's a stimulant. It's not relaxing at all. So why do people who smoke say it's relaxing? Because what do they do when they smoke? They take a deep, long breath and they exhale and they relieve themselves from the burden of constantly telling themselves, no, don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke, don't do it, don't do it, don't smoke. Okay, I can smoke. And that's why it's relaxing, because now they don't have to keep telling themselves not to do it. And so the right way to get yourself to fight distractions, not to tell yourself, no, don't do it. The right way is to tell yourself, not yet. So not no, not yet. So this is where the 10-minute rule comes in. So when I'm sitting at my desk writing, and now I'm bored or uncertain or stressed or anxious or lonely, and all I want to do is go do something else, I follow the 10-minute rule. The 10-minute rule says that I can give into that distraction. Okay. This works when I'm dieting and I want that piece of chocolate cake. It can work if you're trying to, stop checking social media, whatever the distraction might be. I tell myself, I can give into that distraction. I can do it. I'm a grown man. I can do whatever I want. I can give into that distraction. So I'm disarming that psychological reactance. I'm giving myself the freedom and the permission to do whatever the heck I want. But I choose not to do it for 10 minutes. I'm just going to wait 10 minutes. And if 10 minutes is too much, wait 5 minutes, 2 minutes, doesn't matter. Sure, I can do it in 10 minutes. And for those 10 minutes, so what I'll do is I'll set a timer for 10 minutes. I'll set a timer for 10 minutes. I'll put my phone down. Now I have a choice to make. I can either get back to the task at hand, okay, get back to the writing, Or I can do what psychologists call surf the urge. Surfing the urge acknowledges that our emotions are like waves. They crest and then they subside. Okay. But that's not what it feels like in the moment. When you feel bored or lonely or anxious or uncertain, when you feel stressed, it feels like you're always going to feel that way. Somehow the brain tricks us into thinking it's always going to be like this. And that's why we need relief. We need to go check email. We need to go look at our phones. We need to do something to get our mind off of this discomfort because it's going to feel like it's there forever. But of course, that's never the case. So your job is to surf the urge like a surfer on a surfboard. And so one thing that I do that's very helpful is I have a personal mantra. And you can steal my mantra, you can make up your own. But when I feel that tension and that desire to escape discomfort, I repeat this simple mantra. And that mantra is, this is what it feels like to get better. This is what it feels like to get better. And I just sit with that mantra for a few seconds, just repeat it a couple times in my head. I can feel myself calming down. I can feel that stress, that anxiety, whatever was that internal trigger that was going to distract me. I feel it melt away. And then I get back to the task at hand. I get back to my writing. And if when that alarm rings after 10 minutes, I want to go check email, I want to give into that distraction, fine. But 9 times out of 10, I'm back at work. I want to keep working because now I'm in the flow and I'm loving it. So that's just one. There's over a dozen different techniques, as I mentioned before. That's one of my favorites that I use probably every single day. Is that helpful, Tanya?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you. And the smoking thing, I could relate because I'm an ex-smoker. And when you said that, I laughed because yes, it wasn't the urge of the nicotine. It was more like, I could take that 10-minute break out of the busy schedule of the work. And that is why I needed a cigarette. So when I replaced that with maybe just looking at Twitter for 10 minutes, that kind of just went away. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Thank you so much.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so the idea here, and you're absolutely, I'd much rather you check Twitter than smoke, right? Harm reduction is very important.
Yeah.
But even, of course, now then Twitter's a distraction. So the idea is that you want to give yourself something that you can do for those few minutes to effectively disarm the internal trigger, to master that internal trigger so that you can get back to the task at hand as quickly as possible. So for me, it's just a few seconds, literally seconds of repeating that mantra. Okay, I recognize what's going on. I'm just feeling a bit stressed. That's fine because that's what it feels like to get better, right? Of course it's difficult. If it was easy, everyone would do it, right? And that's what makes each and every one of you special. You all do something that other people can't do. And so that's what it feels like to get better. It's stressful. It's anxious, anxiety producing. It's hard. That's okay. That's part of the process. And then you can get back to work and having then mastered that internal trigger.
I think Michael has something to share.
Great, thank you. Well, Nir, with apologies, I have not read your book, even though I do own a copy, but it's one of those things that I've never managed to get to with all the other distractions I have in my life. But so I'm a writer, an academic writer, and often have to write difficult things where I have to get persuasive, and then I'll sit there and agonize over the wording. And so I've been really struggling, and I've been working through a midlife crisis PhD, and I've really been struggling with this. And just a couple of observations. So I know quite a lot about neurotransmitters, and I'm kind of interested in the neurotransmitter piece. And self-awareness, I've sort of realized that what I'm looking for when I get distracted is a little neurotransmitter hit. I'll experience a sort of a painful decision. When the work gets difficult, that's when I want a distraction because I'm looking for a hit. And then often it'll be get up and go and get a little sweet treat or something like that. Maybe it's a sugar hit. Maybe it's something that stimulates a dopamine or serotonin or something like that. But I'm looking for some kind of neurotransmitter relief from the pain of having to deal with that. The other thing that might be related is that I recently was subjected to an Enneagram test, and I was identified as an Enneagram 7. I don't know if anyone else is familiar with the whole Enneagram thing, but the interesting thing about a 7, the category is 7s are sort of visionaries, but their weak point, again, is they don't like confronting pain. They shy away from pain. And again, they're very prone to distractions. So it seems like my personality is particularly disposed to distracting behavior whenever I'm confronted with something that's emotionally painful. So there's an emotional trigger of some sort related to that difficult piece of writing. I'm just wondering if your book sort of explored any of that, or if you have any comments.
Yeah. Let me ask you, how do these two labels that you've identified, being the kind of person who needs dopamine hits and being an Enneagram 7, how are those labels serving you?
I think they provide insight. I don't beat myself up over it. I'd say I'm more compassionate towards myself. I say, okay, there are these things.
Okay,
But
great.
now they open the way for me to looking for solutions.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's look at the other side of the question. How are those two labels hurting you?
Don't know if I could answer that.
Can you think of any ways that those labels might be hurting you?
I don't really regard them as labels as much as just providing insight. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Because you labeled yourself as an Enneagram 7 and as someone who's I think you said a few times, my personality type is. Just wondering, do you think that there is ever, maybe anybody else has any other insights to share around how such a label might hurt someone?
I'm a perennial. I have some kind of allergy where I'm allergic to sweetness. If I consume anything sweet, I usually get a sore throat and my throat gets red. So that happens very often, especially if there's a little slight bit of sugar. So that means I am mostly sick or operating at a 90% efficiency, not my 100% all the time. That means that I cannot stay as focused as other people can because I'm sick. It's not like an ADHD thing where I can cope up with it. I'm just not operating on my full capacity. But I think by just ignoring that, I've been able to just accept it and just go ahead with implementing practices like you recommend. So I think ignoring that is the only way because I think it's a given. I can't really help it.
Okay. So that sounds like something that serves you to know that about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't get 100%, but 90% is me, like most of the time. So by making sure I'm not adding any differentiation factor, I've been able to stay relatively indistracted.
Yeah. Anybody else have any ideas for how a label might hurt you?
I've done the Enneagram thing and for whatever reason, the person that administered it, you know, I was kind of caught between two of the numbers. And to your point, Nir, about reactance, I think there was a part of me that when the person tried to push me into one, you know, like that's not the full story. And I think, and you know, I get for Mike, I'll just speak for myself. I think for myself, I enjoy reading the other labels and making room to say there may be parts of myself you know, that I haven't surfed or that I haven't really recognized as their resources. There may be things that aren't you know, always present immediately, but that I can you know, pay attention and say, oh, that might be going on there too. So yeah, that's what I would say is as a possible for myself, a possible harm in the label.
That it doesn't explore the full facets of your personality. It tends to pigeonhole you. Yeah, interesting. Tanya, did you have something to add?
Yeah, so I have taken that Enneagram test as well as the, you know, INJF, all of those tests that are out there. One thing that I noticed that it kind of hurt me was I was using that as a tool to justify some of my actions and behavior and not really seeing that there might be a window or a room for improvement.
Amen. Amen. That's what I was looking for. There is, whenever a label saps agency, toss it. It doesn't serve you. The dopamine stuff, the serotonin stuff, it ain't serving you, Michael. It's a lie. It's not true. If you look deep into the research around depression, anxiety, this SSRI inhibitors, it's all a bunch of hooey. It's false. No better than a placebo. Has nothing to do with depression. It's not effective for depression. It's no better than a placebo effect. It's something that's been popularized by the media. It's a simple something that the common person can understand, but no psychiatrist worth their weight is going to tell you that the serotonin uptake, the broken brain hypothesis is why we're distracted or why we're depressed. It's just not scientifically accurate. But people keep using those ideas because of the benefit without considering the harm. Like what you experience, what you just told me of, like, yeah, it helps me gain insight. I get it. It's very comforting to think that there's something about you that is cast, that is already died, that is you. And it's a lie. It's a big fat lie that we tell ourselves. And the worst part is that it saps our agency from doing something about the problem. Now, some labels can help you. Some labels can definitely help you. For example, when someone labels themselves, if you look at the psychology of religion, when someone labels themselves with a certain moniker, they become much more likely to act in accordance with that behavior, no matter what that behavior might be. So a vegetarian doesn't wake up in the morning and say, I wonder if I should have bacon for breakfast. No, a vegetarian doesn't eat meat. It's who they are. So that's why the book is called Indistractable. Indistractable is meant to sound like indestructible. It's a productive label. You're the kind of person who strives to do what they say they're going to do. That's, I think, a label that can help you because it gives you agency. It gives you power. It gives you control. The kind of labels that don't serve you are the ones that sap your agency. Oh, I'm elderly. I just had an elderly moment. I have a broken brain because I have this syndrome or that syndrome. I'm no good at time management. I'm an INTJF whatever. And that's why I behave the way I do. So this has two problems. One, it saps your agency because it gives you an immediate solution to the problem of why isn't this happening? So you don't look for the solution. And two, you're too busy thinking of I'm an Enneagram 7 and not what's the task at hand. So this kind of bullshit, I think, is actively harming people. I don't know exactly about Enneagram. I'll tell you about Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs is junk. It's horoscopes. It's awful. It's not scientific at all. And I don't know about the Enneagram 7, so I don't want to speak about that. But the only thing that has scientific validity, and even that's shaky, is the big 5 personality traits of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and narcissism. That's it. There's nothing else. The rest is bunk and it's actively harmful. When people say, oh, my dopamine is low, I need a hit of this or that, they're giving agency to these strings that they think are pulling on their brain. It's just not accurate. It just doesn't help us. And you know what? Even if it's true, let's say for sake of argument, yes, this is happening. It doesn't serve you. It's not helping you. It's what's called a nocebo effect, right? The opposite of a placebo is a nocebo effect. And so it can be actively harmful when we have these labels that aren't serving us. So I know you're dying to rebuttal here, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to push back a bit. I mean, I totally take on board what you say. I don't disagree with it at all. What I'm going to push back on is that I'm a slave to those labels because I don't think I am. I have, during the course of my life, sort of figured out that in many ways, I'm not your average person. And figuring out some of those things about myself has been empowering. It hasn't been disempowering. Yeah. Okay, I'm different in certain ways, and some of those ways are genetic. And I would say that the dopamine thing is relevant for me because I do appear to suffer from what some people would describe as ADHD, right? An unusual inability to concentrate. And I certainly do benefit from the use, and I've only recently started experimenting with them, of drugs that are used to treat ADHD. They do help me focus and concentrate. So that's an empirical fact that I've established for myself. It's not, I'm not a victim to it, but it's just, okay, I figured this out. This seems to work. So yeah, so that's why I raised it. I didn't really want you to get too focused on the labels, but more on, okay, what do we know and understand about how people might be a little bit different in their ability to concentrate, and these emotional triggers and how you deal with them. Because the neurotransmitter thing is sort of a scientific explanation of how the emotional triggers affect us. So I was just curious about that piece.
Yeah. I guess if when I heard you say, I'm in need of a hit, that's, you're giving agency to some made up chemical.
Yeah.
That's not how dopamine works in the brain. I mean, that is literally not how dopamine works.
I guess it's become sort of, it's become very much of the popular talk at the moment.
That's right.
Guess
what?
I'm
it's
just getting
wrong.
into that narrative. That's very interesting.
True.
And it's typically social media that is pointed out as being the culprit, right? Social media giving you the dopamine hits. So that's kind of folklore.
It's social media. Oh, I thought you were going to say something else. It's on social media that people promote this myth.
Yes.
They think that dopamine is cocaine.
Yeah.
It's not cocaine. Not even close. Like, it's nothing like that. You know, dopamine is released when we give someone a hug. It's released when we play tennis. It's released when we play piano. It's released right now. If this is interesting, you're releasing dopamine. Am I controlling you by being interesting? No, because having a conversation releases dopamine. It doesn't mean that that we are giving agency and control just because something releases dopamine. So the point of the matter is, if you're working on something, you're writing, it's hard work. And if it enters your brain, oh, I really need that dopamine hit because I'm the kind of person who has ADHD, that's not serving you.
But I'm not thinking that. What I'm doing is I'm hitting an obstacle, then I'm finding myself in the kitchen back there getting a piece of chocolate. And then I'm asking myself, why am I doing this? That's what I want to know. Is what led me to suddenly end up there? And how can I stop that? How can I interrupt that? That's what interests me.
The first thing is to not say, well, that happened because I have ADHD and my dopamine was wacko. That's the first thing. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. We used to have in psychology this very popular theory called ego depletion. Ego depletion said that you run out of willpower like battery charge, right? You run out of willpower, like gas in a gas tank. There's a bunch of research around this. Everybody loved it in the popular press. It got all over the place. And then a few researchers, as we do in the social sciences, they said, this is a little fishy. Let's replicate the study. Let's see if this is really true. Turns out it doesn't replicate. As far as we know, you do not run out of willpower. It is not a depletable resource, except, and this was the work of Carol Dweck, who's one of my academic heroes. She wrote a wonderful book called Mindset. I'm sure many of you have read. She found that actually there is one group of people who really do experience ego depletion. They actually do run out of willpower, just like you would run out of charge in your battery or gas in your gas tank. Who are those people? The only people who actually experienced depletion in willpower were people who believed that willpower was a depletable resource. You see how powerful this is? It's like Henry Ford said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. You're not broken, Michael. There's nothing about your brain that's broken. And I know you think you're not average, but everybody believes that. Everybody's a better than average driver. Of course not. We're all pretty similar. Of course, there's divergency. And if it's a severe disorder, of course. But the fact that you've been on this call now for 43 minutes and you've been looking straight at the camera and I can sustain your attention, I don't think there's anything wrong with you. I've seen what severe ADHD and OCD looks like. It doesn't look like that. It's because this is interesting. That's why you're here, because we're having a pleasant conversation. And I appreciate that, right? What I want to help you do is to consider. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm asking you to perhaps consider whether these beliefs are serving you or hurting you. This is actually the topic of my next book. It's all about beliefs. And I think we need a revolution in terms of the toxic beliefs that we allow into our brains that are put there by people with an interest not to help us. I think it's far more prevalent than we know, that there are a lot of people who feel this yummy warmth of, well, that's just who I am. That's just how I was born. That's just my genes. And that could be true, could be true. But even if it's true, it doesn't serve you to believe it's true. It used to be in previous generations that people would say, yes, I have a disability and I'm going to prove that I can do it anyway. Today, it's, wow, this is hard. What's my disability? How can this be? How can it be that 10% of children in America have ADHD and only 1% in Europe? there's something messed up here. Everybody's getting a diagnosis. That can't be the case. And of course, there are a lot of vested interests, psychologists, pharmaceutical companies, the people themselves, social media influencers, that want you to believe there's something wrong with you. And I'm not saying there isn't. There might be an actual disorder. But even if there is, skills before pills. Always. Skills before pills. Every pill we take has a side effect.
Sure.
Every pill does. And every pill also has a placebo effect. So yes, you're right that ADHD medication is effective, but Adderall has been shown to be no more effective than a placebo, because placebos are hella effective. Why? Why are placebos effective? Because of our beliefs, because we believe placebos work.
Okay, so circling back to the purpose of my question, what are the skills?
Yeah.
How do we develop them?
Okay, so this is what Indistractable is. So a lot of ADHD practitioners, people who are coaches for people with ADHD, they, in fact, so most people who work with folks who have ADHD, they think they're going to be on medicine for a lifetime, and I think that's a big mistake. The goal should be to get you off of that medication. How? With skills before pills. How do you do it? Step number one: master the internal triggers. Right. So knowing that before you feel that sensation, before you take an action with that sensation, you can recognize it. That's the first step. So on my desk at all times, you see I have this amazing technology of a pen and a piece of paper. And I keep it here 24/7, always at my desk. Why? Because every time I feel one of those internal triggers, boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety, I write it down. Before I get up from my desk, right? And I also want to go get a cup of coffee or a chocolate or something. I feel that all the time, just like you. But I write down what is that sensation first and foremost, so that I can get curious about it rather than contemptuous. You see, most people are either blamers or shamers. Blamers or shamers. They either blame something outside themselves, right? It's the technology, it's the kids, it's the boss, it's something outside of me, which of course is futile because those things will always be there. Or if they're not blamers, they're shamers. This is what I used to do. I'm no good at time management, right? I must not really be an author. I must not be cut out for this. There must be something uniquely different about me, right? That's wrong, that's broken. But of course, that doesn't work. You know why? Because shame is a very uncomfortable sensation. And so the more shame we feel that there's something broken about us, the more likely we are to look for relief with more distraction. So that doesn't work. So we don't want to be blamers. We don't want to be shamers. We want to be claimers. What do claimers do? Claimers claim responsibility for how they will respond to the emotion. So this is very important. You don't control your sensations. You don't control your urges. You don't control your feelings. Most people don't understand this. You do not control your feelings. Like, think about, like, if I had to sneeze right now, okay? If I feel the urge to sneeze, I don't control that, right? I already felt the urge. All I can do is to decide what I will do in response to that urge. Am I going to sneeze all over everyone, or am I going to take out a tissue and cover my face because that's the polite thing to do? So it's about how I respond to those sensations. So the first thing you got to do is to become aware of those sensations so that you have a plan in place for how you will respond. Right now, your brain and my brain used to be habituated to, ugh, I don't like this. Go get a coffee. Ugh, I don't like this. Let me go check my social media. Ugh, I don't like this. Let me go do something else to take my mind off of that discomfort. Because distraction is an emotion regulation problem. That's all it is. It's just an emotion regulation. It's not a character flaw. It's not a broken brain syndrome. It's just that we haven't been taught, how do I deal with discomfort in a healthy way that leads me towards traction rather than distraction. So that's what reading this book will give you, is tools in your toolkit, arrows in your quiver, ready to go, so that instead of doing something that takes you off track, you do something that leads you towards traction rather than distraction. And so there's a lot of things you can do, but I don't know if you want me to go through one by one. But first step, master those internal triggers. That's the most important thing. Step number 2, we talked about a little bit, making time for traction. So do you currently keep a time box calendar? No. Okay. If you do this for yourself and it doesn't work, let me know. I bet you if you implement each one of these 4 steps in small measures, right? Have one practice, one simple thing, the 10-minute rule. I just told you about it already. You don't even have to read the book. Do the 10-minute rule. Step number 2, Make time for traction. Don't just write whenever you feel like it, because you're never going to feel like it. I want Michael on your calendar to see your writing time. Why? Because you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. I'm going to say that again. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So if you have white space on your calendar, what did you get distracted from? You didn't plan your time. So you have to have that writing time and the social media time and the time with your family and your bedtime down to the minute. You got to plan your day. It takes me, I do this every week, Sunday evening at 8 p.m. every week. It takes me 10 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, because week after week, most of my day is more or less the same. I move a few things around week after week. Okay. So now you will know what is the difference between traction and distraction for every minute of your day. Step number 3, remove the external triggers. Is there anything in your environment as you're doing this difficult writing that might take you off track? Your kids, your pets, your boss, I don't know, whatever might take you off track. Is it as simple as turning off that notifications on your cell phone, right? That might be it. And then finally, preventing distraction with pacts. Let me ask you something, Michael. If I asked you, if you don't finish this paper you're working on, you're going to have to pay me $10,000. 10,000 US dollars, you're going to pay me if you don't finish this paper by what's your deadline? When do you think you can finish the paper?
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night. Okay. If I said you're going to pay me $10,000 if you don't finish this paper, are you going to finish that paper?
Probably.
Okay. Let's try this again. $50,000, Michael. If you don't finish this paper tomorrow night, you're going to have to give me $50,000. Are you going to finish that paper?
Going to keep negotiating until we hit a price.
Is there a price? Is there a price?
I don't know.
Well, tell me in your gut. Okay. You're saying because, before you know it, there's nothing you can do about it. You're getting coffee, you're getting chocolate before you even know. It's impossible, right? How could you handle it? You didn't even know you felt the emotion, and all of a sudden you're getting chocolate. But if I said $100,000, you don't pay me, I will pay you $100,000 tomorrow night if you finish that paper.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I see
Are you going to finish it?
Yeah.
Hell yeah, you're going to finish it. Right? Unequivocal, you will finish it.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean,
so we've agreed you can. We're just negotiating the price.
Yeah.
This is a really important point, because a minute ago you said, well, how could I control these distractions? I don't even know when I feel the emotion. I'm already doing something else. But clearly, if we raise the stakes, oh my God, miracle among miracles. Now you can detect the emotion. So we want to be really clear about, is it the dopamine? Is it the personality type? Is it that, or is it that the stakes just aren't high enough? And so that's what these pacts are about. That's step 4. It's the final step. Don't jump to that step. It has to be the last line of defense. So the way I finished this book was that I made a bet with my buddy Mark, and I said, Mark, if I don't finish this book by January 1st, I'm going to give you $10,000. Guess what? I didn't give him the $10,000 because I finished the freaking book. Right? And so I'm not saying that ADHD and personality types and all that stuff, okay, fine. And then what? Paulo Coelho had a wonderful quote. He said, a mistake repeated more than once is a decision. A mistake repeated more than once is a decision. How many times are we going to say, it's the dopamine, it's social media, it's the news, it's my boss, it's my kids, before we do something about it? Because it's the difference between a distractible person is that they keep getting distracted by the same things again and again and again. And oftentimes these identities give people an excuse to say, well, there's nothing I can do. ADHD, folks, nothing I can do. Sorry. My brain, I was born this way. Okay. That's what distractible people do. Indistractable people say, wait a minute. I saw why I got distracted today. And I know why I got distracted. There's only 3 reasons for every distraction: an external trigger, an internal trigger, a planning problem. That's it. There's only 3 reasons. So what can I do?
Sorry,
tomorrow?
What was the third one?
External trigger, an internal trigger, or a planning problem. We can talk about that as well.
Planning problem.
So
okay.
What can I do today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow? Right? So that's where the book comes in handy. That's where you can say, there's like dozens of different techniques I can use. Let me try this. And if that doesn't work, let me try that. Right? That's the whole idea behind becoming indistractable. There's no one magic bullet. There's no secret formula. There's no pill. There's skills that we learn by trying them out for ourselves. Cool? Thanks for being the guinea pig
Right.
here. I appreciate the courage.
Thanks, Nir. Vedant. Vedant, before we go to you, just wanted to check with Rochelle and Faye if you had any questions. I gather that don't have. Okay, Vedant, you can.
Yeah, I've been told a very oversimplified solution to being indistractable is being obsessed with whatever you're doing. What do you think about that? Being obsessed, finding your obsession,
Yeah.
not worried about anything, especially for people who lead a very high agency-oriented life where there's not a lot of structure. Like in my case, no university. I don't formally go to university that much. So high agency, how do I stay obsessed and indistractable at the same time? Is obsession a very negative word for indistractable?
So you're saying using obsession to stay focused? Is that what you mean?
If I'm saying if you are obsessed, you are indistractable.
You are.
That's an oversimplified solution to being indistractable.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay. No. I'll tell you why. Because this falls in the same category as flow. Does everybody know flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi? This idea that there's certain behaviors that we can get so entranced by, that they're so fun, that time seems to melt away, and it's super easy to do things. It's like what they say about work in Hollywood, right? What do they say about work in Hollywood? It's nice work if you can get it. Yeah, everybody wants to be Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie or whatever. You know, like, yeah, that'd be great. How do I get that? And so that's the same thing with flow and obsession. If there is something that you find flow over, like if you read Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he talks about, basketball players and artists and people doing things they love. That's the kind of stuff you can get obsessed over. That's the kind of stuff you can get into flow over. Can someone please tell me how to get obsessed or into flow over doing my taxes? Because I freaking hate it. So there's no need for my book over stuff you like to do. If you like to do it, there's no problem. You're not getting distracted, right? The problem is with the crap we don't like to do. It's Michael's academic paper. That's hard work. It's my next book. It's hard work. We see something very similar now with habits, right? This miracle cure of habits. How many books about habits are there out there? And including mine. My first book was all about habits. The problem is that habits, by definition, what's the definition of a habit? The definition of a habit is an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. Little or no conscious thought. How exactly do you write with little or no conscious thought? I don't know. I can't do that. It's a lot of conscious thought. How exactly do you meditate with little or no conscious thought? If you're meditating, like people say, I want to start a meditation habit. If you're meditating with little or no conscious thought, you're doing it wrong. You're asleep. The whole point of meditation is to be mindful about your thoughts. It's about bringing awareness to your thoughts. It's the opposite of a habit. Oh, I want to start an exercise habit. If you're pushing, if you're lifting, if you're trying to get better, if you're trying to get faster, that requires a lot of conscious thought. It's super hard. That's not going to become a habit. So when people say, oh, I want to create a habit of writing or exercising or losing weight, whatever, what they're really saying is there's something I want, but that's hard and I don't want to do. Can't I just push an autopilot button? Well, for some behaviors, you can, right? Like driving a car, you can drive a car and have a conversation, because once you learn how to drive a car, it's mostly habitual. It's done with little or no conscious thought, right? But that's relatively easy, right? You're not always, now if you're a race driver, now you're white knuckling it because it's different, right? There's new challenges that you haven't seen before. But if it's route and you've seen it before, can become a habit. But getting better at something typically cannot be habit forming. It's hard work. So I think what we need to do is to properly assess what can be a habit, what can be an obsession, what can be flow, and what will never be one of those things. So you say, okay, but it's semantics. What's the big deal? Here's the problem. When people think that we can turn things into obsession, we can turn things into flow, we can turn things into habits, and they try, right? They say, oh, I read some book that told me that a habit can start in 66 days or 44 days or some kind of stupid number that's not backed by any research. They think there's this miracle formula. They do it for those many days. And hey, lo and behold, writing is still not easy. Exercise still sucks. Meditation is still hard. So what do people do? They say, oh, no, it was that book that was the problem. No, they think they're broken. They think that there's something wrong with them. And of course, there's nothing wrong with them. It's a stupid technique that they've been taught. So what we need to do is not call these things habits and obsessions and flow. We need to call them routines. What is a routine? A routine is a series of behaviors frequently tongue-tied there. A series of behaviors frequently repeated. There's no preconception that it has to be easy. And that's fine. We need to get comfortable with discomfort. Writing an academic paper, Michael, is going to be hard work. Writing my next book is going to be hard work, and that's fine, because if it was easy, everyone would do it. That's fine. That's what makes us unique. That's what makes us special. This is what it feels like to get better. And so when we acknowledge that that's part of the process, that's part of growth, we should enjoy that discomfort. We should welcome that discomfort. And then we don't have to hold ourselves to this high standard of, oh, now I've lost my obsession. Does that mean this is bad? Or I'm not going to do it until I feel obsessed, until I feel flow? No, then we'll never get it done. So the idea here is to not rely on motivation. It's not to rely on flow, obsession, or habits. The idea here is to do the hard work that needs to get done because you said you're going to do it.
That's fair. That makes a lot of sense. I want to make a comparison to athletes. A lot of athletes, after retiring, say that they were somewhat addicted to playing that particular sport, or addicted to the crowd, the entire environment, that it became such a routine for them that after they retire, they weren't able to live with themselves. Can that be applied to business? Like, while working and making presentations or whatever and constantly growing, can that be modeled in such a way that there are certain elements that help you feel addicted to what you are doing? Are there certain...
Yeah. I wouldn't use the word addicted, because addiction by definition is a persistent compulsive dependency on a behavior or substance that harms the user. So I wouldn't call those things addictions unless they're really harming you, which can happen, right? Like, there are people who, if you go to the starting line of any race or marathon, you're going to see that person in the front row or the front line that's way too skinny, that exercises way too much. So even healthy behaviors can become addictions for some people who have a certain predilection. That's a whole nother story. But for what you're describing, an athlete who says that they're obsessed, that they love it, that I think the only life advice I can give you there is, if there is something like that in your life, which there certainly is for me in my life, like for writing, for me, for writing, when I have a question and I get to research it, and I find that the way I thought the thing was actually different from what I think and what most people think, because I uncovered some research and some logic, and I cracked this code. I love it. I think I have the best job in the world. Like, I get to learn for a living, right? And overturn apple carts of things that I thought were true that clearly weren't working for me and for other people, and now I can understand why, right? That to me is awesome. It's hard though. Like, it's really difficult work, but it's the closest work I found to something that is play. And so that should be the standard. And I talk about this in the book around how to play anything. So I cite the work of Ian Bogost, who's a professor at Georgia Tech, and he talks about how you can bring play to these hard situations. Now, play, very interesting. He says, play doesn't have to be enjoyable. That's weird. Play doesn't have to be fun, he says. That's very interesting. He just says that it has to be engaging enough to keep your attention from getting distracted. Very interesting. He says, well, how do you do that? How do you bring play to a situation? He says two things. He says, add constraints. Add constraints. So for example, how long can I do my taxes in 30 minutes or less? Right? That's a constraint, a time constraint. Time boxing adds a time constraint. I'm not going to measure myself by how much I did. Maybe I'm going to see how much I can do in that period of time. So kind of the reverse of what I just said. He gives the example of a sandbox, right? If you backed up a truck and dumped a bunch of sand in your front lawn, that wouldn't be very fun for kids. But if suddenly you put a few 2x4s around the sand, now it's a sandbox and people love it. Or kids love it, right? Because you have a constraint. It's like, what can you build in this little box? So adding a constraint is one thing that you can do to find play. The other is to look for the variability. So one of the psychological tricks I talk about in my first book, Hooked, is about variable rewards. And this goes all the way back to B.F. Skinner and about operant conditioning. And we know that intermittent reinforcement, variability, right? This is what makes slot machines engaging. It's what makes sports fun to watch. It's what makes movies interesting. It's all about uncertainty. So he says, if you can take a task, no matter what that task is, and find the uncertainty, find the mystery, right? Peel it back like an onion to uncover all the things it has to reveal to you. That's how you can find play in that situation. So adding constraints and finding the variability. This is how we find play. Now, again, play doesn't have to be fun. It doesn't have to be enjoyable. It just has to hold our attention long enough to help us complete the task.
That's good. And constraints can mean like having a work-life balance, right? Like something like that. Or constraints means that you can only do something to some extent.
The audio was funky. What? Say that first part again.
Constraints, let's say in business or while you're working, means that needs to have certain work-life balance or doing something to a certain extent or having something to fall back upon.
No, well, a constraint in terms of while you're doing it, right? A constraint to the task. So it can be a time constraint. It can be a productivity constraint. It can be a money constraint. It can be anything that makes that, when I write, or any writer for that matter, the worst thing for an author is a blank page. The hardest thing for an artist is a blank canvas. That sucks because there's no constraint. I could draw anything. I could write anything. So by adding a constraint, okay, I'm going to see if I can convey this idea in 140 characters or less. That was the genius behind Twitter, right? That's a constraint. In a way, made it easier because it had a constraint. So what kind of constraint could you add to whatever you're working on to bring play to that situation? That's what constraints give you, which of course, by the way, is the opposite of what most people think. Most people think, well, I'll be able to be creative. I'll be able to finish my novel. I'll be able to start my business. I'll be able to have a good relationship with my family when I have more time, when I have more freedom. It's the exact opposite. If you ask folks when you have that, think for yourself, when you had that weekend, right? We've all had that weekend where you had nothing planned. And you thought, oh my God, I'm going to be so productive. I'm going to do my taxes. I'm going to organize the basement. I'm going to reshuffle my books. I'm going to do all this stuff. And when you have nothing planned, nothing gets done because there's no constraints. The most productive time you have is when you say, I'm going to work on this task, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, then I'm going to play. That you have that constraint. That's when we feel our best. By the way, you can also schedule time, and I think we all should schedule time for rest, right? How many of us schedule time for rest? Isn't that so ironic? It's like we run around all day long trying to get everything done. And then when we actually want leisure, we're still thinking about all the stuff on our to-do list because we haven't scheduled time to just be with our family without guilt, without shame of, oh, there's more things I need to get done. So on my calendar, there is time for family, because when I have that time for my family or for leisure or for myself, there's nowhere else I need to be. That's traction. Everything else now is a distraction. Faye, Shafa, I haven't heard from you guys. How are you doing?
This has been fascinating. Thanks. I would just like to say, in listening to all of you, a lot of this comes down to being honest with ourselves, which is pretty difficult, I think, as human beings. And I'm struck that a lot of it is pain management. In the sense, as human beings, we're trying to manage. Any further thoughts around those?
So this is literally a quote from my book.
That I need to read your book.
Time management is pain management. That observation. I mean, you got it in what we've been on for an hour. It took me 5 years to figure this out in writing my book. That all human behavior is spurred by a desire to escape discomfort. We used to think about carrots and sticks. We've all heard this trope, right? Carrots and sticks. Turns out that's not how the brain works at all. That everything we do is about one thing and one thing only, and that is the desire to escape discomfort. Everything, even wanting to feel good, right? Craving, desire, lusting, hunger. All of these things are psychologically destabilizing, right? Because the brain doesn't get us to do what feels good. The brain gets us to do what felt good, the memory of what felt good. And to get us to do things, it has to make us feel bad. So once you realize this fact, that all human behavior is spurred by the desire to escape discomfort, it's exactly as you eloquently said, Faye. Time management is pain management. Money management is pain management. Weight management is pain management. It's all pain management. You're absolutely correct. But to me, so some people hear that and they're like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. To me, that's incredibly liberating because that's all it is. That's all it is. It's just pain. It's just discomfort. It's just in our heads about these artificial constraints of, oh, this feels bad. Let me escape it. Let me scroll the scroll the news or worry about somebody's problems 5,000 miles away so I don't have to deal with my own issues. Let me, take a drink or smoke a cigarette or whatever to escape that discomfort. But if that's all it is, to me, that's incredibly empowering because it brings the issue down to something I actually have control over.
Okay, so you just mentioned about money management. I teach money management, money skills. And what I've noticed a lot is how people are distracted. And that's the reason why they don't make the effort to find ways to manage their money. They just put it back. They don't schedule time. One thing I teach is, set a time to manage your money. Your budgeting is either weekly or daily. But it's just so hard to get people to do that. So is there anything that you could advise, in terms of as a teacher, how I could get my students to be less distracted when it comes to, managing their money or any skill that I'm trying to teach them those skills. So that's one thing I'd like to.
What age are the students?
So I teach mostly women and also kids sometimes. So that's.
But so, young adults or?
Young adults, and I also have a few clients who are in their 30s, 40s, mostly like college students. So young adults.
Yeah, and where are they?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, please.
Yeah, so mostly like students, college students, like they're right after school or they're about to step into college, and so and they're so distracted with social media and it gets very difficult sometimes.
Yeah. So it's easier for me to answer this question if it was for a person. for you, like if you said I'm distracted with the way I spend money, I know what to answer you. It's much more difficult to help others. Meaning, and I get this all the time from parents who say, you know what, my kid is super distracted. He's always on his computer and he's always playing video games. What do you think I should do? Right. So in that case, because they have the issue like everybody else, but they want me to help their kid. And I'm not saying that that's your problem. I'm saying that it's difficult for me to help to change others. I don't know how to change others. What I can do is to help people change themselves. Meaning, if you want, it's not up to me to tell you how to spend your time. It's up to me to tell you how to help you spend the time the way you want to spend your time. And the same goes with money, I think. So I think a good place to start is with values. Meaning, if you want to know what someone's values are, you look at two things. You don't hear what they say. People will say all kinds of nonsense. But when you really want to know what someone's values are, you look at two things. You look at how they spend their money and how they spend their time. So you look at their checkbook and you look at their calendar. That's really what your values are. How you spend your money, how you spend your time. So I'll tell you, I don't know exactly with money. So I'm going to tell you what I do know, which is how to spend time. And so what I advise people to do is to look at their values in 3 life domains. And I think this is actually directly translatable to money management as well. So think of your life in terms of 3 life domains, and then make sure that you schedule your time on the calendar to reflect those values. Because what are values? What's the definition of values? Values are attributes of the person you want to become. Those are values. Values are attributes of the person you want to become. The goal, I think one of the life goals, it should be to be the kind of person you admire, be the kind of person you want to be. And so to do that, we have to spend our time the way that the person we want to become would spend their time. Meaning, with these 3 life domains, the first one is you. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others, you can't make the world a better place. So what I want folks to do is to look at their calendar, like literally take out your weekly calendar, whether that's on Google Calendar or paper calendar, doesn't matter, and ask yourself, how would the person I want to become spend time taking care of themselves? If learning is important, it's important to all of you. You came today to learn something. I'm assuming it's one of your values, lifelong learning. Is that on your schedule, right? In whatever format works for you. right? This call was scheduled, right? That's why you came, because it was on your calendar. Is time for reading, if that's important to you, on your calendar. What about physical fitness, right? A lot of people say, oh, health. Oh, health is very, very important to me. That's one of my values. Health. Can't have anything without health. But is it on your schedule? Do you have time to exercise? Do you have a bedtime? My daughter, she said to me, I told her back a few years ago, I said, you have to get to bed. It's your bedtime. She said, Daddy, do you have a bedtime? She was absolutely right. I didn't have a bedtime. I was a hypocrite. Now I have a bedtime. It's on my schedule. So planning the time for yourself. By the way, it can be things for fun as well. You like video games? Great. Put time in your calendar for video games or for watching Netflix or whatever it is you like to do. Put it on your schedule. So this exactly translates into money as well. What are your values? First, pay yourself, right? Is it one of your values to have to live to old age? Is that something you value? Does the person you want to become get old and have a healthy retirement where they're taking care of themselves and they're self-sufficient? Or do you expect the government or your relatives to take care of you? What's that going to look like? So if that's one of your values, are you setting aside money for retirement, right? It doesn't have to be one of your values, but if it is, that might be something you want to do. So that's the first life domain when it comes to time, you. The next life domain is your relationships. So what we find is that most people, they give whatever scraps of time are left over to their family. After work, after television, after all this stuff in their day, they give whatever scraps of time. Okay, the husband, the wife gets this, the kids get that, yeah, little scraps of time. But if those relationships are important to you, if one of your values is to be an available father, is to be a good friend, well, that time has got to be scheduled as well, right? It has to be on your calendar. Then finally, the work domain. Now, when it comes to work, there's two kinds of work. We have reactive work and we have reflective work. Reflective work is a kind of work that can only be done without distraction, thinking, strategizing, planning. Reactive work is the kind of work that's very responsive to emails, to messages, to your boss, to your kids, reacting to all these things. Now, everybody's calendar is going to have some amount of reactive work, right? That's just part of most people's jobs. But if you're not scheduling time for reflective work, if you don't have that time in your schedule to think, I promise you, you're going to run real fast in the wrong direction. So that time has to be set aside as well. And so I think maybe the biggest lesson, again, I'm not an expert on money management. I think when it comes to figuring out, it's very much like a budget. That's nothing new. You've probably heard that a million times. But a budget based on what? Based on your values, based on the kind of person you want to become. And so I think that applies to money management. And I think it even more so applies to time management.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'll take a rain check. I think we have about another 10 minutes.
Sure.
And I just wanted to kind of slip in one question that I had.
Sure.
With, so there are positive distractions. So how do we, for example, for me, when I'm writing or researching, I tend to get into the rabbit hole of just reading because I'm curious about things, and while I'm learning, but there's a time where actually I've kind of spent hours on something that I should have probably half an hour. So
tell me about it. We're cut from the same cloth, but that doesn't sound like a positive.
Okay.
Is that a positive? I'm not sure. What do you mean?
For me, when I actually perceive the way, of course, positive, because I actually get to, learn. If I'm writing on a topic, there are 4 or 5 threads that I kind of, I'm able to add into something that I'm writing on. So from that perspective, it's positive. But yeah, it doesn't serve the purpose because I end up spending more time than I should have spent.
Right. Okay, so this is an easy one. So there is no such thing as a positive distraction. Distractions are always bad because distractions always take you away from what you said you were going to do. So if you said you were going to write, that is not time to research. You said you were going to write. Now, on your calendar should be time for research. And you should spend as much time researching as you want in advance. Because here's what's going to happen. Researching, you and I both know, is a lot more fun than writing. Right? That's the fun part. But the hard work needs to get done. The writing has to get done if you want to accomplish your goal. So what you've got to do is to budget that time and say, okay, let me think here for a minute. This is why time boxing is so important, because I'm forcing you, unlike the stupid to-do list technique. I hate to-do lists because to-do lists have no constraints. You can always add more. More. I want to be a good mother. I want to be a good parent. I want to be a good child. I want to do a business. I want to write a book. I can always add more. A time box calendar has constraints. There's only 24 hours in a day. That's it. Only 24 hours. So it forces you to say, okay, here's how much time I have. How much time would the person I want to become to get this goal, right? To live out my values, spend on research versus writing? Question, right? Now I'm going to set time aside for research and I'm going to set time aside for writing in the amount of, in the proportion that I think is correct. Now that might change, right? But not in the day, never in the day. When you set your time box calendar for the day, you must follow it. Now, tomorrow you can change it and say, you know what? I need more time for research. Great. Adjust that time. You can always adjust it, but in the future, never adjust it in the day. Now, while there's no such thing as a good distraction, that doesn't exist, there is such thing as a diversion. A diversion is neutral. A diversion can be good. In fact, we pay for the privilege of having our attention diverted. If you think about it, why do we like going to movies? Why do we like reading books, right? Those are diversions of attention. When you go see a movie, you know that it's fake. Those are actors up there, and it's not even real. It's light on a screen. It's a total illusion. But we enjoy suspending disbelief when we watch a movie because we like having our attention diverted, and it can be very healthy. But here's the thing. It's not a distraction because that's what we chose to do in advance. We went with our spouse or our significant other to the movie, right? That's what we intended to do. So that's very healthy. Now that's traction. It's not a distraction, it's traction, because that's what you said you were going to do. So diversions can be very healthy. Distraction is never a good thing.
I think, yeah, time boxing, yeah, I've not been kind of done that for research, but it's a good idea. I tend to keep it together with writing and research, which is definitely not something that helps.
Yeah, I've never met anybody who says that time boxing doesn't work for them if they've actually tried it. A lot of people won't start it. That's the problem with time boxing, is that people think it's hard, and it is hard. But you know what? Everything worth having in life, it's hard. Sorry. That's life. It works. Time boxing, and I didn't invent time boxing. I can't take credit for it. Thousands, I'm not exaggerating, thousands of peer-reviewed studies have found that time boxing is by far the most effective time management technique we know. And unless you're a child or retired, there's no excuse. You got to do it. You got to plan your time because, again, you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from.
Right, thanks.
Can I ask, do you teach your daughter all of these things? And is she immersed in these types of approaches?
Funny you should ask. So yeah, she's 15 years old, and she's heard me give this talk so many times that she's kind of absorbed it through osmosis and hearing me give these talks. And in fact, yeah, she absolutely uses these techniques, and she doesn't have a problem with social media like her friends do. She in fact, funny enough, is writing a book right now about how to be a self-directed child using some of these same techniques, and it's amazing. I mean, it really does work.
I think Thomas said.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick question about the time boxing. If there's a particular, I've done it online, which is very helpful in terms of being. I could have it on my laptop, have it on my phone. It transports, but the visual and kind of tactile thing of being able to have the paper. I'm just wondering if you have recommendations in terms of how to sort that out, of what the best formats are, if you know of some really good, better or worse online formats.
So when it comes to tools, I use Google Calendar. I like it because I can have it on my phone. I can have it on my desktop. That's what I personally use. I can give you a link. Hold on one second because I got this request quite a bit. Give me just 1 second here. I actually built I built a tool for exactly this question, that you don't have to use any kind. Here we go. There's the link to my blog where I made this downloadable Google Doc that you can use. The best tool is the one you use. I haven't really found one that just says, oh my gosh, this is the one everybody should use. Everybody has their own idiosyncratic ways of doing things. So some people really love a paper calendar. That's great, right? You could buy them for $10 at a drugstore or at the Office Depot or something. I like using an electronic tool just because so much of my week is the same, right? Like I eat breakfast at the same time most days. I exercise most days. My writing time is pretty much the same time. So I would say about 70% of my calendar stays the same week to week. And so I don't have to constantly rewrite that every week. But some people really like that of planning the week ahead by rewriting it. So again, the best tool is the one you use.
Thank you.
Sure. And I just think, I don't know if I made it clear, but it's in the chat if anybody wants to see that link. Great. Well, yeah.
Last two
One more?
questions.
Sure.
When you want your life to be eventful overall, like do a lot of things at the same time, attend university, do work, all of that, you're necessarily distracted by a lot of things because you want to do a lot of things. So how do you manage to stay indistractable during that time, if not by time blocking? Probably you've covered this.
Wait, you lost me at if not time blocking. Why not time blocking?
No, time blocking is something you've covered. But the second part of my question is, how do you forgive yourself for, what's the best way to forgive yourself if you probably missed out on time blocking? What's the best way to dust yourself?
Great. Yes, this is a terrific question. Yes, so everybody will fall off track. I still fall off track from time to time, and I wrote the book. It happens because becoming indistractable doesn't mean you never get distracted. It means you strive to do what you say you're going to do. So sometimes I get distracted. It happens. But here's the difference. We talked about earlier, the difference between a person who's indistractable and a person who's distractible is a distractible person keeps getting distracted from the same things again and again. An indistractable person says, okay, I see what you did there. I'm not going to let that happen again. The key to answer your question is self-compassion. We know that people who give themselves self-compassion are much more likely to accomplish their long-term goals. So if you're the kind of person who beats themselves up, oh, why did I do that? You're much more likely to quit and say, to hell with this. But if you understand that this is a process, this is about learning this new skill, building this muscle, becoming indistractable, and giving yourself the grace to just get right back on track using the techniques of internal triggers, external triggers, time boxing, these planning problems that we talked about, that's the right way to do it. So giving yourself that grace. How do you do that? The best way we know to cultivate self-compassion, very simple, talking to yourself like a good friend. That's the key. Turns out that people who talk to themselves in third person, kind of like how Donald Trump does. You ever hear Donald Trump talking? That's why Donald Trump has such a huge ego, because he talks to himself in third person all the time. There's a reason for that. It really does work. So if you can talk to yourself, not that inner voice that's telling you you're good, bad, whatever, but a voice that tells you, that talks to you the same way you would talk to a friend, right? You do not have to believe everything you think, right? That's not your soul talking in there. It's just noise. So when we understand that we don't have to believe everything we think, and we can talk to ourselves in a way that serves us rather than hurts us by talking to ourselves the way we would talk to a good friend, offering the kind of advice that a good friend would need.